Hey, it's John at Tinderbox Arts. It's time for a little bit of maintenance on my Triumph Bonneville. This is a 2010 model, so it is fuel injected. And this particular maintenance that I need to do is something I've honestly put off a little bit because it's a little bit of a pain. I need to grease up these bearings that are in here, the headstock bearings. And it's not a big deal to do that other than a whole bunch of other stuff has to come off in order to get to them. Some of the things that I'm doing you don't necessarily have to do. For example, I am going to remove the fuel tank because it's just so easy to drop a wrench or the handlebars need to flip over to get them out of the way. I could scratch the tank doing that. It's just so easy to damage that tank. So for me, it's well worth it taking that off. So to get access to where I need to be, I'll take the fuel tank off. The handlebars need to be removed and flipped over. I need to take the wheel and tire off, of course. The forks have to come out. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that has to get out of the way so I can get access. Then there's a nut up here which will get removed, and underneath that in this area here is a double nut, like a lock nut, and that needs to be removed so I can finally get access to these bearings. And all I want to do is clean out the old grease, install new grease, and then put everything back together. This is something that has not been done by me since I've owned the bike, so it's probably the original grease. So I'm going to get all that set up. I won't bother you on camera with that. I'll get this bike on a lift. I'll get all these things off. And then when we get to the area that we're talking about in here, I'll turn the camera back on and we'll start talking. All right, I'm getting there, but I thought I maybe should pause and just go over how I've gotten to where I am here. Now, I have this bike right now up on a stand. And before I put it up on the stand, any of the bolts that were going to be difficult to loosen, in other words, would take a lot of force to loosen, I did that first so that I wouldn't be doing it while the bike's on the stand. So now I'll remove these fork tubes individually, put them aside for later maintenance, and that will leave just this assembly here. Okay, I think we're about ready. I got the fork tubes out. This whole thing here is a bit of a hot mess. What I did was I took a cargo net and all the stuff, the headlight, the instruments, all this stuff here, I just kind of tied together with a cargo net, and I have it kind of laced to the ceiling here, so just to take a little bit of the weight off so it's not hanging on the wires. And the handlebars, I snuck around this side, and again I have a bungee cord here going down to my stand, just to get that out of the way. It's still not easy to get in here, but and you got to be careful with all these wires and cables hanging about, but it's as good as I'm going to get it. So now, finally, I can turn my attention to getting this apart, and the first thing we want to do is get this nut off. All right, with the top of the assembly off, now you can see what we're after here, which is this double, I'll call it a lock nut. So this bottom nut tightens against the whole assembly here to give you the preload on the bearing. The top nut just locks that bottom nut in place. So this is twisted onto this nut until it's tight and it can't move. To get this apart, you loosen the top nut first, and then the bottom nut will come easy. Now, Triumph makes a special tool for this purpose, but of course it's crazy expensive and I'm way too cheap to buy it. So I do have an alternative. This is a 38 millimeter nut, both of them. And I discovered that there is a wrench sold on Amazon and other places meant for washing machines. I have no idea what the actual purpose is, but this was about $10. I bought two of them for the hell of it. And it fits on the nut perfectly. So this is going to be my solution rather than buying the Triumph tool. Now the Triumph tool has one other trick up its sleeve, which is there is a nut or a place right about here welded onto the wrench itself so that you can use a torque wrench on this wrench, if you will, and that will let you set the preload to a determined amount. So there's two ways around this. One, I could just weld a nut on this, and I might do that. Or I can just do it by feel. So I'm going to take this apart And if I'm pretty confident I can do this by feel, then I'm not going to worry about it. It shouldn't be too hard to figure out, you know, approximately where we need to be. Essentially, you want these bearings to move easily, but have just a slightest amount of preload on them. So, you know, I've done that many, many times before on other vehicles. It shouldn't be that difficult. So if you want to, you can buy this washing machine wrench, weld a little nut on it, and do it the way Triumph intended, or you can do it, I guess, the redneck way, and just do it by hand. So what I need to do is hold the bottom one, and to do that I need one of these thin wrenches just like this. So I have two of these, as I said. I'm going to take one of them and I'm going to cut this off right here, and that will allow me to, you know, insert it like that, and that's all I really need to do. Alright, so I used a hacksaw to cut this off here to just give me a regular wrench rather than a closed end. And I have this second one, and I also put them in the vise and flattened them out a little bit because it was awkward with that weird angle. So let's see if I can have a little more luck now. I'll slip this in here like that to hold that one in place. And this one like this. Those handlebars are a little bit in the way. Alright, now let's see what I can do. There, that loosened up easy. So I think you probably do need this second wrench. Now this top one will come right off. I'll take that off. And now this one is the one for the preload. I know it's basically where it was before. I just want to get a feel for how tight it is. And it's not tight at all. So actually, this one was probably loose for a while, and I've been riding around like that. So I'm glad I did this. It does feel tight. See, that's where it hits. So yeah, it was quite loose. That was a good half a turn too loose, I think. Interesting. Alright, well, we learned something there. So now I can take this one off by hand. Now we can get all this stuff apart. Alright, with the bottom removed, I'll show you that in a second. Let me just get to the top here and show you that. So if I take this off right here, it's just a little seal there, and you can see that's the top race of the bearing and a little cap there, and here's the bearing itself. I'm pleased to see there's plenty of grease in there, and actually the grease looks pretty good. I don't see any unusual wear on the race. I will clean this up, of course, but on first glance it all looks pretty good. So I'm just going to put this back here for a moment so I don't lose it. And then if we look at the bottom here, same thing. This is the original factory grease. It all looks in good shape. I don't see any unusual wear. I'm looking right here where the bearing rides, and that looks pretty, some slight wear there, but nothing serious. So I think we're in good shape. However, I am glad that I'm taking the time to add more grease, and clearly that nut was not tight enough on the top here. So this is something that's, you know, you have to take apart a lot of stuff to get to it, but I think it is something you should do once in a while, even if you don't think you need grease. I mean, having that too loose is not a cool thing. So I won't bore you with this part, but I'm just going to take this apart, clean off the old grease. I know what type of grease that is, so I don't have to go crazy about it, but clean off all the dirt and ugliness out here. I'll install new grease, and then we'll put this back together, and I think this is going to go pretty quickly. Let me mention a little aside here while I'm greasing things up. You can stick your key in this little cylinder here, and you can lock the handlebars in place, right? I don't actually use it I don't think I've ever used it, honestly, but this can become corroded, especially if water and stuff is getting in there. And now is your chance, with everything open, to easily get in there and lubricate that if you need to. Just to show you, when you turn that cylinder, it locks into this little recess right here. All right, I've got grease on the top race here. I've greased the bottom race down here. And if we look down here, the yoke and everything, we got grease here on the shaft, on this bearing, the top bearing. So everything's greased up with that red wheel bearing grease. Inevitably, when I put this back together, I'll get some grease on these threads right here, but I need to clean that off because that will affect how tight the nut gets, especially if you do use a torque wrench versus doing it manually. Okay, let's talk about preload. Now, I am going to try to do this manually because I've been doing this many, many decades and I'm comfortable doing that. But if you're not comfortable doing that, that's fine. You can recreate the Triumph service tool by welding a little nut right about here where my finger is, okay? What you would do is, with that nut in place, you would put it on this nut here, and then you would use a torque wrench at a 90-degree angle, just like this. So ultimately, you're going to end up like this. So whatever you weld on here, you need to be able to attach your torque wrench to it, just like that. At that angle and that distance from here to here, they want 40 Newton meters. Okay, so that's the preload. Now, when I took this apart, we were nowhere near 40 Newton meters, no matter how you did it. So it was definitely loose. So for me, I'm not too concerned about it. I'm going to do it by hand. But if you want to do it the factory way, that's how you would do it. For me, what I'm going to do is install the wrench on here. And what we want to do is tighten this so that it's really a little bit too tight. And honestly, I will say this. If you have a helper to hold all this stuff out of your way, that would be good. I don't right now. I got to do this alone. But that does sort of get in the way. But that aside, what we want to do is tighten this. And I'm going to hold the bottom until I get really, actually it's still finger tight, until I get really a little bit tighter than I think I need to be, and then I'm going to back it off. Because I don't want this too tight, we'll put stress on the bearing. Alright, so that is just hitting tight. I'm just going to go that much more and get that seated. I'll move it back and forth a few times. I want to make sure it's definitely seated, and that is definitely seated. I definitely don't want any tighter than that. I think I want it a little bit looser. So I'm going to back that off slightly. And that's where I need to be. Now when I put this lock nut on here, I got to be careful that I don't turn this. So I will be watching, and because I have two of these wrenches, I'll put one on the bottom to prevent this nut from turning, and I just want to lock the top one to the bottom one where it is right now. But I will probably play with this one more time off camera to make sure I have it right, but that does feel about right. So it's not super tight, and you definitely don't want any play in it, but you don't want to over tight either. Okay, off camera, I did that one more time while I'm paying attention without worrying about YouTube, and I think I have it good. So I'm very pleased with that. If I move all this stuff out of the way and hold it so it doesn't get in the way and just turn this, it feels good. It feels tight, but not too tight. I mean, that's good. I'm pleased with that. So I'm not concerned about it, but you can do it the factory way if you want. So now that I have that set, I'll take this second nut, and I think I went that way, and we're just going to put that right down on there. Again, I made sure these threads are clean. There's no need for Loctite or anything like that. So I'm going to snug that down by hand. Now it's there by hand. So I'm going to take the bottom nut and hold it with this wrench. And actually, you know what I'm going to, no, yeah, I guess that'll work. I'll hold that with this wrench, and I'll squeeze these wrenches together to tighten those, but I don't want to turn the bottom one. So I can do like this. It may turn slightly, but it's not the end of the world. I'm going to get that a little there. Now I should be able to squeeze these together. There. That is pretty tight. All right, so now, they may not line up. That's fine. It doesn't matter. It all gets covered. But I just want to make sure this top nut is tight to the bottom. And then again, I'll take this out of the way. And that does feel good. So I think we're in good shape. Now, we'll put everything back together. And again, now's your chance to have everything apart, to clean, maybe look at these cables, make sure there's nothing misrouted or anything like that. So I will take some time to do that. But we'll put it all back together, and that should be it for many more years to come.